Greetings ladies and gentlemen, Adrian here. Welcome back to the channel and to a special video that I'm putting out for you guys today. It is my Gaming Hall of Fame. To celebrate 10K subscribers, I'm going to be doing something special here. Let's make this an interactive video as well. What is this video all about? I'm going to be sharing the games that shaped me into the player I am today. These are the most important games that I have played, because they either consciously or subconsciously made me fall in love with a certain genre and have altered my preferences and bias towards that sort of style of gameplay. And I owe a lot to these games. So while I'm going on about these titles, I want you guys to start posting in the comments, what is your Gaming Hall of Fame? Which games have changed you? Which games have made you become the player you are today? Now that sounds dramatic, but trust me, if you really sit down and think about it, there are those games out there. Now this could have been a very long video because I've played so many, but I've cut it short to the most important short list of games. And we'll begin with the very first computer game I've ever played, and that is Command & Conquer Red Alert. I remember this pretty vividly. I must have been a kid at the time, 1995. I was standing behind somebody playing Red Alert on the computer, and I absolutely fell in love at first sight. From the visuals to the sound, the colors, watching this guy build his base, recruit units, and go fight in the middle of the map or defend his base. As a kid, I was really attracted to that, and I remember pestering my parents so much for a computer, for a system that could run Red Alert so I could then play this at home every day after school, and that's exactly what I did for about 2 years straight. Red Alert was my game. It was my jam. And it's kind of funny thinking about it because my start happened to be RTS, real-time strategy game. And what I loved about Red Alert, thinking about it now, even if I was playing it as a kid, the decision-making process that comes from playing RTS games like Red Alert, like StarCraft, and the many great ones out there from that era, really does help you become a better gamer, especially when you have to make snap decisions and react to what the AI, or if you're playing against another player, what they're up to. And somehow that also gave me an interest for war in general, not just war games, but for war. And that's going to be important later on. But back to Red Alert, the gameplay was incredibly fun and it still holds up. For the single player story campaign, look, there's not much of a grand story in there that's going to win awards. It was cheesy and the cutscenes were B grade, the voice acting and everything was B grade, but I still loved it. It was fun, it was funny, and it gave me so many fond memories. And because of Red Alert, I kept playing deeper into the franchise with Red Alert 2 and Red Alert 3, and I also went and checked out other RTS games in the Command & Conquer series. I think Tiberium Sun was the next installment in the CNC franchise, and I did enjoy that as well. But I gotta give props to my first ever PC game, and that was Red Alert. Now, in the years from Red Alert moving into the console era, I've played plenty of games in between, but most of them had to do with sports if I recall correctly. I'm a big fan of football, which is soccer to you guys in the States, and have bought into the EA franchise almost every year with the FIFA games and the Pro Evolution Soccer games out of Japan. And in between that, I've also dabbled into plenty of wrestling games. I grew up on the WWF. So those were the large majority of games that I played in between until the next game emerged that I now feel worthy deserves a Gaming Hall of Fame spot on my list. And that is Company of Heroes. Surprise, surprise, another strategy game, RTS strategy game. Company of Heroes is set in World War II. And because of my early start in the CNC days of Red Alert and games like that, Company of Heroes just felt like a natural progression for me. The graphics were better, the campaign was historical, and a few years back I had watched this movie called Saving Private Ryan, directed by Steven Spielberg, which completely opened up my mind to war, and World War II specifically. It's because of Saving Private Ryan that I decided I wanted to know more about World War II, because there's something mystical about it. Like, I don't know how to describe that, but to me it felt like the age of heroes because the world was sort of united in combating the threat of our generation at the time. And regardless of where you are in the world, most nations had a part to play in it. And you know, you read about it in your school's history books and history lessons. So getting to see that brought to life in a movie and then in a video game that you're playing was pretty huge for me. It really was an eye-opener, and Company of Heroes just took that to the next level. Because it was a strategy game, I enjoyed it a lot more. Company of Heroes had a squad-based control mechanic, so you control squads. When they get shot at, you lose individual members of that squad until everybody's dead. Whether you're playing the campaign with objectives or the multiplayer matches, I love that strategy element of having to go out and capture resources like fuel and munitions and power supply in order to build and recruit more units. And it felt really well balanced. And the level of gore too, when a tiger tank shoots at your squad, rangers for example, you see arms and limbs getting blown off in glorious detail. And yeah, it's gory, but it's also authentic, and I think that's important. And years down the line, when Company of Heroes 2 got released, I jumped on it immediately. Until today, it's still one of the most highest played games in terms of hours I have right now. That's Company of Heroes 2, which is, to me, right now, the best World War II strategy game simulator, period. And if you, like me, have an interest in anything World War II and you want to experience that in a game that is not just a first-person shooter, something from a bird's eye view, a strategy game, then I highly recommend checking out Company of Heroes. It is by far my favorite World War II game franchise out there. So far, it's been all RTS war strategy games on my Gaming Hall of Fame list at the moment, but that's going to change. In between the Red Alert years and the Sport years and the Company of Heroes years, I also got my first taste of fantasy. I had dabbled in a few fantasy games prior to this upcoming title that I'll talk about, but I usually didn't play them for very long. I was more interested in snippets of the game rather than the full game experience itself. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. So we've had a few Lord of the Rings games come out RPG style where it follows the movies, and I was more interested in getting more of that world either through the story and having fun with the combat system, but I didn't care about the game package as a whole. I wasn't really immersed because I knew what the story was. That all changed when my sister handed me a copy of Dragon Age Origins by BioWare sometime in 2009. And this game changed me forever. Dragon Age Origins blended high fantasy with the usual elves and dwarves and magic with dark fantasy. Lots of gore, lots of politics, and the result is a world that is absolutely glorious, both in terms of gameplay, design, story, lore, characters. And Dragon Age really opened my eyes into the RPG fantasy genre like no other game has before. The one thing the game showed me that I consider really important now for me is just how important stories can play. And I'm not just talking about the main missions and the main cutscenes and cinematics, I'm also talking about NPC character development. Because through your actions and interactions with these characters that BioWare has created, it adds so much more depth to the game. It made it more realistic. These aren't just cardboard people that you talk to just to get a few extra lines of dialogue. No, they almost feel like real people reacting to the world that has come under threat from the Fifth Blight and your actions as being one of two of the last Grey Wardens to stop it. And I just love how my actions shaped the game world and shaped the opinions of not only the other NPCs I've yet to meet, but the NPCs I already have in my party, my companions. And I shouldn't really call them NPCs, especially my companions, because you can play as your companions in Dragon Age Origins. But I rated that game so much that I vowed whatever BioWare game comes out in terms of RPG, I was going to go and play it. That was my introduction to fantasy RPGs and to BioWare as a studio. So because of BioWare and because of my experience in Dragon Age, I then went back to the past to check out other BioWare games like Baldur's Gate. The other BioWare games I checked out was KOTOR, aka Knights of the Old Republic, which was also great because I was a Star Wars fan, and being able to play an RPG game that introduced a lot of mechanics that the Dragon Age games now has. Deep companion stories, choices that matter. It was really fulfilling. And that's how my love story with fantasy games started. And as you guys know, today I cover MMORPGs because that's my preferred genre, but the setting has always been fantasy. And that's because of games like Dragon Age that has given me this craving for seeing more fantastic, rich worlds like these. And one of my goals is to visit as many of these fantasy worlds as possible to soak in all that story. Not too long after Dragon Age Origins and all the RPG games I've jumped into in between, there's that little matter of the Elder Scrolls to talk about. This must have been late 2006 when, again, it was my sister who was playing this game called The Elder Scrolls Oblivion on her computer. I wasn't interested at the time, but watching her play it, it was pretty interesting. It just seemed too big for me to play or comprehend at the time. 2011, The Elder Scrolls Skyrim was released, and there was so much talk about Skyrim that I decided, you know what, maybe I'll give that a go. Maybe I'll find an experience similar to what I found in Dragon Age and all the other fantasy games that I've jumped in between. So I took the plunge. I got Skyrim and decided I was going to play it for 1 week. It ended up being 3 months. I skipped classes, lectures, family reunions, high school gatherings. I did a lot of crazy things to get out of my responsibilities as a college student just so I could stay home and play The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. I had no regrets. I was expecting a more narrative-driven RPG game like what I got in Dragon Age, but what I got was something completely different, which I really enjoyed as well. From being able to explore, go to where you want to go, never mind the story, just pick a path, roll with it, and have the world react to what you're doing. Kill somebody if you want to, steal their things if you want to, pick up any item in the world, read books within a video game, create your perfect RPG character based on your favorite RPG fighting styles. There's a lot of things that Skyrim opened my eyes up to, and the biggest takeaway for me was the level of immersion that I got in the game. And sometimes when you play an RPG fantasy game like Dragon Age where the narrative is so heavy that if you play it for long hours in a row, you're gonna get flustered with all that heavy load of story that you have to soak in. But I could play Skyrim for 10 hours straight and you won't have that problem because it's so immersive in terms of what you can do that you're always discovering something new. You're always finding new paths to explore. And when you get tired of all of that freedom, then sure, you can then start playing through the story that is available. And that level of freedom was really rewarding. And that's why I spent so much time playing Skyrim in one go. I just had to get it out of my system before I go back to playing the game that I was currently playing at the time, which is what I'm about to talk about next. My first MMORPG and the game that really put me on the path to everything MMO related, including starting this channel, is The Lord of the Rings Online. I first heard of Lotro through an advertisement that I found in 2009-ish, and then I saw another ad for it in 2010 saying it was going free to play. Now this was pretty big for me because at the time, being in college, I didn't really have enough pocket money to contribute to an MMO subscription, if you will, so what I could afford was only free to play games, and this sounded like a perfect match because I'm a big fan of Tolkien. I love The Lord of the Rings, so being able to play an RPG game online with other players sounded like a good proposition since it is The Lord of the Rings. I was also aware of other MMORPGs out there, even way before hearing about The Lord of the Rings. I've played the Warcraft games in the past. You guys already know, I started out with RTS, so Warcraft 1, 2, and 3, and the expansion as well, have all been games that I've played and loved. The problem was I could not afford a World of Warcraft subscription back in the day, back in high school, so that's why World of Warcraft wasn't my first MMORPG, in case you were wondering. And because Lotro was my first MMORPG, I took everything in the first year as the gospel. Yeah, great combat. I loved the story, lots of text, very authentic. And as someone who's read the books, being able to see characters that the movie never highlighted was a great plus. Getting to visit iconic locations that the movies never expanded upon was another great plus. And being able to be in a kinship, aka guild, with other like-minded players who are very helpful and kind was incredibly rewarding for me because having never played an MMO before, I had no idea what to expect. But Lotro's community really painted the picture in my mind that MMORPGs must be great when playing with other players. This is great. And that was my main MMORPG for many, many years. If it wasn't for Lotro, I would have no interest in MMORPG as a genre. And as with everything else, once you fall in love with something, you tend to try and branch out and get as many experiences as you can in other MMOs. So that leads me to two of the newest additions to my gaming hall of fame, the first one being The Elder Scrolls Online. I've already talked about my Elder Scrolls experience, my first time experiencing The Elder Scrolls Skyrim, which was my first Elder Scrolls RPG. So to me, jumping into The Elder Scrolls Online when I first heard about it was sort of like a no-brainer. Wow, can I get that offline Skyrim experience online with other players? And because of my experience in Lotro, I was expecting community and other systems to be just as good or even better. What stopped me from playing ESO at release was watching reviews. This was about 2014, and I was active on YouTube as a viewer, but I didn't have a channel of my own. But I did watch a lot of other reviewers that I look up to and still do today. These guys are inspiring and are one of the many reasons why I decided to review games. The one that stuck out to me the most was the ESO review by Angry Joe Vargas, one of my inspirations. And his review told me everything that I needed to know about the Elder Scrolls in terms of managing my expectations and coming back at a later date, because as an MMO, it's not in a state where I would enjoy it. And I totally understood that because of my years playing Lotro. I knew when expansions launched in Lotro, it was going to be a while before anything was in its optimum state, whether that means patching bugs, fixing broken things. I had already experienced that cycle in an MMO, so I knew what to expect from ESO. And in a way, I'm glad I gave it that time, because when I start the channel to review MMOs, on my roadmap, I knew I was going to do the Elder Scrolls 2 years after release to see just how much it has changed for the better. And games like the Elder Scrolls Online today has really spoiled me because of its buy-to-play model, which I find incredibly generous compared to a lot of other MMORPGs out there that are on either side of the payment model fence. You're either free to play with heavy microtransaction and paywall, or you're a subscription-only MMORPG, and the games that go buy to play has to get it absolutely balanced and right, and the Elder Scrolls Online is one of those games that gets it just right. It doesn't have that same magical feeling of playing through Skyrim for the first time in terms of what you can do in-game, but the Elder Scrolls Online ESO comes pretty damn close in terms of taking inspiration from what the single-player games allowed you to do. You could still steal, you could still venture off in a direction and begin questing. The story, the voice acting, and all that stuff, it's good enough to keep me invested and interested. And because it is a continually growing world, I'm always looking forward to seeing what else ESO releases in terms of content and zones in the future to keep me occupied while I wait for the next Elder Scrolls game, Elder Scrolls 6, so that I can go ahead and lose another 3 months into that game. That's what the Elder Scrolls has always been about for me, immersion in a fantasy world, and so far ESO has delivered for me in that regard. Guild Wars 2 is very similar to my experience with ESO. It's the one MMORPG I kept hearing about when I was playing Lotro, but that wasn't a good enough reason for me to go check it out. I was aware that it was a buy-to-play game, and the reason I did not buy into it earlier was because I didn't want to lose Lotro. I was heavily invested in the game, and I was too afraid that if I go play another game that is supposedly better than Lotro, then I would leave everything behind. From the kinship that I had, from the friends and the raiding alliances that I had. This was possibly my highest point in Lotro, and I didn't want to interrupt that and disrupt that by going to another MMORPG to play. That was my biggest concern, which sounds puny and almost like I was insecure, but so be it, that's how I felt. Years later, when Lotro started losing that magic for me in the late 2015, early 2016 era, then I decided Guild Wars 2, it's time to check it out. And again, no regrets. Another MMORPG that maximizes the buy-to-play model without abusing it, very generous in terms of what it offers. The presentation of the story and its diverse cast of characters resembled a lot of what I loved about RPG. So naturally for me, as long as an RPG game, offline or online, has the core key tenets that I need to find fulfillment and enjoyment in the game world, consider me sold. And this is where I'm going to have to cut the video short, guys. It's been pretty long at the moment, but trust me, there was a lot of games that I wanted to talk about too in terms of firsts and great experiences and gaming experiences that really offered me something different. Games like The Secret World, Fahrenheit, Borderlands, BioShock, and a lot more that unfortunately I don't have the time to elaborate on now, so maybe I'll do a part 2 if you guys want to have a part 2 of this, but that is it. This is my gaming hall of fame. These are the games that shaped me into the player that I am today. So I look forward to reading all the games that have shaped you into the player you are today in the comment section below. So post them in the comment section, hit the like button for more videos, and subscribe to the channel for more MMO and gaming content. Once again, I'm Adrian, and I thank you for watching. What up? You've reached the end screen. Thank you very much for watching that video. And if you want to watch more, you can click on the cards at the bottom here. Any one of them would do. And if you like what you see, feel free to subscribe to the channel by clicking the big round button somewhere down there. You'll see it.